Hi, John. How are you, mate?
I'm very good, Gordon. How are you, sir? Good to see you again.
Yeah,
I wish it
really
was in
great to see you. Great to
person.
see you.
Yeah,
I think the last time we spoke was almost right at the beginning of the lockdown, if I remember right, wasn't it?
yeah, yeah. Seems so long ago. It actually does, actually, for some reason. I actually tweeted the other day, and I was being serious, does anybody remember what life was like before COVID? It just seems to have this permanence about it. How we live our life, face masks, hand sanitizer, vaccines, boosters, every day bombarded with stats with COVID. It's at the top of the news every day and has been for 2.5, 3 years, 2 years now, since March 2020,
Hmm.
when we first went into lockdown. We obviously knew about COVID before that, the sort of looming virus that was coming up, but we all thought, maybe, or many of us thought, I think, that it was going to be restricted to, the global south, Iran, then it hit Italy, then Spain, and then boom. I still remember Boris Johnson at the start when he went on TV and said, people are going to die. And if 20,000 die, we'll be happy with 20,000. And we're like, oh my God. And 146,000 dead later, here we are.
Yeah, 146,000. It's what, is it a
And
million in
counting.
America? Yeah, it's got to be close to it, hasn't it? I mean,
It's million. It's over a million. They've got the highest death toll in the world. Yeah, I think we've got the highest in Europe or Western Europe per head. So I think it's obviously hardened us in some way. These statistics just come in, the death toll, unless you're obviously personally affected, which more and more people are.
yeah,
But I think it's, was it Stalin once said, one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. And I think there's an element of that come in because you have to in order to function. You wouldn't be able to function if you were just becoming bogged down in the tragedy of this pandemic, And it's also obviously exposed some of the structural weaknesses of the British state at the start of the third decade of the 21st century, the growing inequality, the lack of resources, public services, underinvestment, degradation in NHS. All of those things have become really much more apparent than they were before. Low pay, frontline workers. The first lockdown, we were all clapping for the NHS. We were all praising key workers. Nobody was talking about, bankers or CEOs.
hmm,
Well, the people who were really important. But we seem to have lost that now. We've gone back from that, you know, um, and it's just get on with it. Get on with it. So yeah, I wish I could say there was anything to grasp onto to give us hope for the left for sort of a counter hegemonic politics, but because of the COVID, we've not been able to congregate as much as we'd like. I
yeah,
still think the left, in large part, is recovering from the demise of the Corbyn project. There's been no sense of a serious attempt to regroup. There have been attempts by various groups to kind of lead the charge in various issues. For a while, Black Lives Matter, potential tip of the spear, that sort of receded into the background. There's a growing contraction, we've talked about this, of conspiracy theory, which in many ways has replaced anti-establishment politics.
yeah.
So there's a bunch of things that have come to light in the last couple of years, and that COVID's been key in kind of helping to formulate and drive.
Yeah, we're really in trouble, I think. It's, I mean, if you were to, we were quite, I think back when we spoke, I mean, there was almost, even though it was a horrible thing, situation that we knew we were in, there was some semblance of we'll get through this somehow. But
Yeah.
this is just it. It looks like this is just going to go on forever, and they've
Yeah.
got no other way of dealing with this other than locking everybody down and
Periodically. Yeah.
causing more misery periodically. And
Yeah.
um, I'm worried now that this is doing more damage than the virus itself, John.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
worried that
I agree. I think we're getting to the stage where the cure's becoming worse than the disease. I think the damage, the economy, obviously, people talk about that. I mean, universal basic income should have been introduced at the start of this.
yeah,
Yeah. But I think we're headed in that direction. The Tories are obviously going to resist. Sunak's going to resist. But I think we're headed in that direction based on how the economy's affected, how, austerity has just destroyed so many sectors of the economy itself. We need new investment. People need to start spending money again. We need to have a demand-led response to the economic shock. late capitalism. We've not really drawn the right lessons. I say we as a society, not we on the left, from the financial crash of 2007-8 and the ensuing global recession. Late capitalism is entered its mad dog days. So it's just a shame, because you keep going back to what if Corbyn had been elected in 2017? He came within 2,500 votes. Despite dealing with a treacherous PLP, a hostile media and establishment that was doing everything in its power, he still came within 2,500 votes of getting elected. And then obviously after that, they didn't treat him as a joke anymore. They really gave the establishment a fright, and they went all out for him, and they destroyed him by 2019. He was destroyed. The anti-Semitism, witch hunt, the stuff about being friendly to terrorism, all sorts of, everything was thrown at this guy. What if we would have been, imagine if he'd been elected in 2017, Gordon. By that time, he'd have 2-3 years of investment, 3 years of getting the NHS up to speed, wealth redistribution, privatising railways. He was talking about setting up a state pharmaceutical company to compete with the big pharma when it comes to medicines, to make them more affordable. We would have had something approximating to a humane society. And we would have been in much better shape clearly to deal with this public health emergency. So it's sad. It's sad how, history is a story of roads not taken. Somebody said, actually, maybe I'll do, she'd write something, a prospectus of a kind of fictional account of the Corbyn years in government.
It would be quite kind of interesting, just as an exercise to do, to see like where your mind would go as to what might have happened. Listen, you and I both saw a man destroyed. They destroyed. This is certainly the most anti-racist politician in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And they turned the most anti-racist politician into somebody who was a raving racist who hated the Jews, according to the media. And
hated Britain, hated the troops, was friend to the IRA, was friend to Hamas, all misrepresentations. Don't get me wrong, I put my hand up, I've been critical of Corbyn in the past.
Me too.
Sometimes unfairly. He's not a saint, but he's an inherently decent man who was a victim of great indecency. I met him once. I don't claim to know him, but you can tell. You look at the causes he's never done, visiting people who are part of the poor, oppressed, different communities. You're absolutely right. He respects all communities. But he was destroyed because I think the establishment, not so much his domestic program, which I think they could have lived with.
Foreign
policy. Because that's where this country derives, or this country's ruling elite derives its identity from. Its usefulness to the American empire, its alliances, NATO membership, the Atlantic Alliance, and also he would have threatened the arms trade with Israel because of the treatment of the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And so that was, the apartheid lobby has huge power in Britain. That's not a conspiracy, that's open. Just as it has in the US. And everything was brought to bear to bring him down. Everything was brought to bear. He's the most gentle, quietly spoken, decent, allotment tending, jam making, sort of vegetarian, and this in his 60s, 70s, and he struck fear at the heart of this establishment. I think there are definitely lessons to be learned going forward, but I go back to what I say. I hate to be the optimism of the pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will, as Gramsci once put it. I can't see anything to be optimistic about right now. I think you have to be realistic. There will be some pushback at something, but I think we've become so atomized.
Yeah,
there's so much anger, but it's being directed at the wrong places.
Oh.
I think there was a lot of bandwidth expended against the EU, which was a mistake in my view. It let our own rulers off the hook in many ways. Boris Johnson, he managed to acquire a new working class base in the North and the Midlands on the basis of Brexit, on the basis of patriotism, a basis of history, a misrepresentation of British history and Britain's role in the world. And he rode that very skillfully, him and his advisors and his, the people behind them. But he's now exposed because we all knew he was corrupt. We all knew that he was a rogue in rogue's clothing. The practice bonhomie and buffoonery, that's all about that's to machine him into a character, a lovable rogue. And look, when you vote for a clown, it's not funny, especially in the worst crisis we've faced since the Second World War. And we're paying the price for it.
I know the media are making a big deal about this picture out the back of number 10 from, I think, during one of the lockdowns. There's a few, I've got many thoughts about this. Obviously, it's abhorrent what they're doing. I mean, you know, I think that people have been highlighting, there was one care worker around that same time who drove to a beauty spot to have a sandwich, and she was fined £200 or something like that during the same time. I mean, when I see pictures like that, this is clearly a works party that they're having, you know, in the garden whilst they've locked everybody down. What's the overarching thing? There are many thoughts I have, but the most for me is they're giving off the worst kind of impression here, because it looks to the public that they're not taking this seriously and they're not scared of this at all, and they're not worried about COVID. Look at them having cheese and wine. What are your thoughts on it? On especially how it's one rule for us and none for them, isn't it?
Well, that's clear. I mean, it's been clear since time immemorial, but it's never been more open now. The arrogance, you know, the sense of entitlement, this old Etonian entitlement, it's bred in them at school. These private schools have got, I've said before, I'll say it again, these private schools are a menace in our society. They produce people with this sense of entitlement. They form these networks of privilege, and they fail upwards. No matter how many jobs has Boris Johnson been sacked from? So many. It's columnists making up quotes, etc. He was a terrible mayor for London, terrible MP, and he keeps getting promoted. That's because of the class system that we live under. It's antiquated. It's 19th century. This is a 19th century theme park in many ways. They protect each other. I'm suspicious as to the motives of the person who took the picture. It's certainly the one from number 11. Yeah. Obviously, there's an internal faction fight taking place in the Tory party. I think there'll be moves on in Johnson before long. After North Shropshire, I thought there would have been a leadership challenge. I think maybe Christmas and New Year saved them. Then the Omicron crisis saved them, because it knocked that story, you know, off the front news to the extent that it was. But I think in the new year, there might be a leadership challenge. Either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak. It's interesting that picture, as I say, was taken from number 11. And it's interesting in the timing that these pictures are being let out into the media. That gathering point. Last May 2020, that was meant to have taken place. The parties from last Christmas. So something's happening within the establishment towards the Johnson government. I think the knives are out. I think he's seen as an electoral liability, whereas before he was seen as an asset by the 1922 committee, and obviously these new Tory MPs of the Red Wall seats that they won in December 2019. Sorry. So there's a real move going on, I think, within the upper echelons of the Tory party. But in terms of the message to society, I think that's why Johnson doesn't feel he has the authority to impose any kind of so-called circuit breaker right now, because he knows he doesn't have the authority. But I don't know what to make of this Omicron. We're getting mixed messages. We're told the symptoms aren't severe by some experts. We're getting told that it's too soon to tell. We're getting apocalyptic wargaming from Niall Ferguson at the infamous Imperial College, talking about 5,000 deaths a day and 10,000 hospitals. You know, so you don't know what to believe. So they're obviously, it's good to prepare. You have to prepare for the worst case scenario. Yeah. But I think we have COVID fatigue. I mean, I like most people, I'm sure you're the same. When it first became a thing, we were all tentative. Yeah. You know, I was very strict about adhering to 2 meters and so on. I'm much more relaxed about it now, not because I don't think there's a need for it, but because I've lived with it for so long. I think it's hard to keep that up. It's just difficult to keep that up, especially when you live in a society in which the rights of the individual is ingrained in our cultural values. And obviously the values of Thatcher, which we've all been shaped by to some extent, because we've lived in this society. We're bombarded with the message of the dominant ideology every day. It's in our cultural references. It's in our, it's in our entertainment shows, the cult of celebrity. It's in our politics. It's in our economic system. And so we're not like China. No disrespect to China. China's done many remarkable things, though I don't know if I could live there because I'm from a different culture. Mm-hmm. Or any of these countries in Asia particularly that have a collectivist ethos that's ingrained in their culture and or is also expressed in its politics. So it's no accident that those countries have done much better from COVID than countries in the Western developed world. I don't think there's a big anti-vax movement in China, or there's a big anti-vax movement in Taiwan or in South Korea, because I think this is a Western phenomenon, and it's healthy to be suspicious of authority, but I think that suspicion has gone into the arms of unreason with this non-materialist sort of stuff. Now, not all, and can I just make this point, because not all anti-vaxxers should be put in the same box as Piers Corbyn or David Icke. David Icke, some of the stuff David Icke says makes sense.
Yeah, he do a lot of what he says is it makes sense. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, he's a very intelligent man. But I've got close friends that still refuse to take the vaccine, and they're not anti-vax. There is vaccine hesitancy, and our leaders have to get to grips with why that is. That's their responsibility, because they've done so many things that have shaken people's trust in authority and in government.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there's the Western anti-vax movement, you know, so to speak, the conspiratorial side of things, and I know, I don't. So the anti-vax people who are anti-vax, like, they're not our enemy. You know what I mean? The reason they don't trust the media is because they've got really good cause not to. Yes. You know, the media, just in the last 5 times since I've done this, John, the five years since I've been doing this, the amount of lies that come from, I'm sorry, the TV just went on. The amount of lies that we've been told in the media about huge stories is incredible. So you can't blame people for not trusting authorities. And it was clear, it's evident. And if I've got, and when I drop this, I'll put the placard over it. There was a decision made by the BBC, and they were quite open about it very early on, in that they were going to frame things in a way that they were going to not promote stories, even though they might be true or whatever, that would cause any vaccine hesitancy. And that is obviously something that they've done, you know, and they did it because they, you know, thought it was in the best interest of the nation to keep people safe and whatever. So they needed people to get vaccinated. But the thing is, they've lied so much about so much. You can't blame people for not trusting them. And then I've got a story which will blow your socks off. I don't know whether you know about this, but I was meant to go on holiday last week, John. And I got vaccinated in May, my first vaccination. 6-8 weeks later, I got my next vaccination. That was in the beginning of July. Right. I had a really bad reaction to it as well. I documented it. I was off my feet for 3 days. I had, you know, all the general reaction to it that people were getting at that time, but it wasn't nice. So about a week later, I get the message saying, oh, well, you know, if you want you to go abroad, then you've got to download this pass. And I didn't want to get the app because I don't like apps on my phone. Facebook, Twitter, you know, they're not on my phone. I don't want apps tracking me. So I got, you could have either the digital certificate to say that you've been vaccinated, or you could have the paper one. And I'm like, I'm useless with paper, send it me digitally. So I went through the procedure, they found me. I'm somebody who has been at the same doctor since birth, John. I was actually born on the road that my doctor's surgery is on. I haven't moved for 12, 13 years. And they sent me this certificate. And sorry, the TV's gone off again, John. Sorry about this, mate. They sent me the certificate, and I put it on my phone. I thought, right, okay, that's it. There was it was like a QR code. They said it was valid for 6 months. For all those people say it's only 30 days. No, it's 6 months on the hard copy that I had. It's 30 days on if you have the app, which I didn't have. And I put it on my phone. Great, I've got it. It was QR code above it said vaccinated, and that's it. Just put it on my phone. So I'm due to go on holiday in December. I find out that I've got to get a yellow fever jab, so I have that because of where we're going. And I got to the airport and they gave them the pass, and they said, this says you've only been vaccinated once. You've only had the first jab. I'm like, I've had 2 jabs. What are you talking about? The pass that they'd given me was wrong. It hadn't updated. And they said, oh, when did you do that? I said, about a week after I got my 2nd jab. She says, well, if you download the app, it's probably updated then. I'm like, I didn't want to download the app, all right, but I'm at the airport, we're due to get on the plane. So I download the app, lo and behold, get through all my stuff and pass all the security and whatever, and it says I've only had 1 dose. Now I've had 2, obviously. They've messed up here. As a result, my holiday gets cancelled. I couldn't go. Unvaccinated people were getting on the plane, by the way, because you could take a PCR test for 2 days before, and if you got a negative PCR test, you can go. I had a PCR test in my bag for on the return, because you've got to do one on the return, but we had to delay my holiday as a result. Now, I've done a video on this, and there are 2 schools of thought in the comments below. It's had about 80,000 views now on TikTok. And there's 2 schools of thought in the comments below. The first school of thought is, you're an idiot. You should have checked. It's your fault. And which I will say, listen, yeah, I'm an idiot. I should have checked. But in my defense, I've been at the same doctor's since birth. I had the thing that said vaccinated with, I didn't look any further. I was stupid. Yes, I trusted them to get it right. And and the second school of thought is, you're an idiot. You shouldn't have got the vaccine in the first place. So my comment section is filled with people saying one of those 2 things. The people are they're all blaming me basically for different reasons. I've jumped through every hoop, and I've trusted them to get it right. I was born on the road that my doctor's surgery is on. I haven't moved around. I've been at the same place for 13 years. I've been there since birth, like I say, and they still got it wrong. And when I phoned up the NHS people, they said it'll take 5 to 21 days for us to investigate it. Right? Okay. So I rang my doctors up to try and get them to change, and they're like, well, we've only got you down as vaccinated once. And I'm like, well, you rang me and booked the thing. So they've got everything on the system, that my appointments, everything like that, but they haven't got the 2nd jab on the system. Till that's on there, I can't go anywhere. My life is pretty much on hold. So we've postponed the holiday until next month. The people at the airport were brilliant. The staff were there. But something that they said to me, John, was, this happens every day, multiple times. And that was just at Gatwick. So it's happening up and down the country. I'm British. I was born here. I was on the same street. I've got a British name. And they're still getting my shit wrong. What are they doing to somebody who's only been in the country 15 years, maybe with a Muslim name? How many? Because the media are not talking about this, because they might, it's a true story, but it might promote vaccine hesitancy. So how badly are they screwing things up? Because they've literally screwed my life, certainly my holiday. I was meant to be going away for the Mrs. birthday. So what do you think about that? There you go.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes to the disorganization that passes for society in the UK. Everybody's left to their own devices. We have antiquated airports, antiquated transport networks, antiquated systems for all different sectors of society. If you go to an airport in any Asian country, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, China, I say you're in a different world. Everything is properly integrated. It's all joined up. There's nothing joined up in this country. It's held together by paper, sticking plaster and string or whatever, and I have never thought for a second about going abroad since COVID hit the UK, because of the reasons that you've just done. The stress level must be off the scale. You've got to get PCR tests. You've got to get your vaccine passport. You've got proof that you've had a vaccine. I feel so sorry for these people working in the and having to deal with that, the stress that they're having to put up with for not enough pay. It's horrible. It's horrible. And you're right, every day there'll be stressful situations at airports. people trying to go on holiday, finally can't get on a plane. I've been in that situation for different reasons before. It's one of the most stressful things you encounter.
Oh,
You think of the money you could be losing, and you try to get on a plane, and it's just one silly mistake you've made in the booking process. You feel that you're going to hit the roof. You try to calm down. It's horrible. And COVID has only multiplied that stressful experience of flying nowadays. So, I mean, I'm with the camp that says, obviously, why were you wrong to trust your doctor? There's nothing wrong with trusting your doctor.
this is what I feel like an idiot. Don't get me wrong, because I should have checked. But I've got no reason not to trust my doctor. None.
Yeah, exactly. But this is just another aspect of the whole of the entire problem. Going back to the unvaccinated versus vaccinated, you're right. That is a false dichotomy, and I think part of me thought that the demonstration that we had in London on Saturday, the 18th of December, we're recording this on the 21st of December. Yeah, a part of me thought that was a travesty. Seeing all these people together. I got tweeted saying it's a triumph of unreason over reason, of conspiracy theory over medical science, over selfishness over society. But I watched the scenes and there was a lot of false consciousness. There were different messages, the placards. It was a wide spectrum of people. It's not a homogenized movement at all. Mm-hmm. It's very heterogeneous, and it's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of anger, but you're right. The real reason that we're having these movements in the West is because we have a media that's unfit for purpose. We have a media that serves power. It doesn't challenge power. No. And the plight of Julian Assange is a case in point. It's a case in point. The New York Times published a story that last week, again, just for your viewers, this is the 21st of December, 2021, about revelations that thousands of US airstrikes, drone strikes, missile strikes taking place throughout West Asia had been underreported in terms of the casualties. That was on the front page of the New York Times.
Yeah,
that's what Julian Assange reported about Afghanistan. I mean, he's in prison. He's been in incarceration in one form or another for over 11 years. They've nailed this man to the cross. And he was only doing what proper journalism was meant to be about. The heady days of Pilger with the documentaries in the late 70s and the 1980s, the investigative reporting. That people would see that as something to be valued. It'd be on the front page of the Mirror, it'd be on the front page of the Guardian. The Guardian went out of his way to join in the demonization of Assange. Went out of his way to join in the demonization of Jeremy Corbyn. Anybody that comes along that properly challenges the status quo rather than tepidly dances around the edges is held up as the enemy within. That's a malaise that we have to get to grips with on the left.
Yeah, they get destroyed. He's a good friend of mine now, is Chris Williamson, who was destroyed. I mean, this is honestly, if you meet Chris, and if I don't know whether have you met him, John? I consider him a good friend of mine now.
I took part in a Zoom meeting with him last year, but I've not met him personally, no.
I consider him one of the most decent people I have ever met. He really is a proper good socialist, and he's such a selfless person. And to watch what they did to him was criminal. It really was. He never, what they charged him with was that he said in a Labour momentum meeting that Labour Party had apologized too much for anti-Semitism. And if you watch the meeting, he didn't say that at all. He actually said, for the most anti-racist party, we have given too much ground in this. We should be standing up for our roots and what we've done in this. And he got a massive round of applause. And that's why they destroyed him, because his message resonated.
Yeah.
It's criminal, isn't it, what they do to good people?
Well, he understood that what was happening was based on lies, was based on misrepresentation, was based on fabrication. A lot of it came from the Israeli embassy in London. That's been documented. Mark Regev was part of this campaign. The Jewish Chronicle, which has been successfully sued more times than any other newspaper. But Keir Starmer saw fit to send out a tweet the other day, last week, saying congratulations on 180 years in existence. I don't think he's ever. I don't know if he ever regularly heaps praises on Muslim. I don't know, but it's all always very sinister. It's open. Clearly, it's a horrific thing to be called as an anti-Semite for obvious reasons, historical reasons, etc. And Corbyn had to deal with that. And there was a stage where I really thought, I mean, don't forget, we also had, this went to the very upper reaches of society, military command, military ex-generals were saying that Corbyn would be a threat to national security.
They were shooting targets of him, weren't they?
The paras were in Afghanistan shooting the Jeremy Corbyn pictures as target practice. Nothing was done meaningfully. They were warned. You know, I was worried for the man's safety. There was incitement. It was actually incitement against Corbyn. It really was. It was real enemy of the people stuff for a certain period. And Chris Williamson was caught up in that snare because he was a loyal ally of Corbyn's. And Chris Williamson is a class fighter. You know, he is. Yeah. You're right. He's a decent guy. He's in it for the right reasons. He was a great constituency MP, and he was demonised and kicked to the curb. So many others are being demonised in the media. Kerry Ann Mendoza, people like that. They've all been attacked mercilessly because they happen to be Corbyn supporters, and they saw the popularity of Corbyn. They want politics to be a game that they play themselves. It's an inside the tent business. They saw Corbyn at Glastonbury. They saw these pop-up meetings that were spontaneous with thousands of people who turn up and down the country, the open air meetings. Starmer couldn't fill a telephone box.
No.
You know, but he's seen as a quote unquote safe pair of hands. Corbyn brought millions of people into politics who were otherwise alienated from the system. And they had to keep these people out because the masses were awakening. It's where real power resides when you join in common cause. They were awakening, and Corbyn did that. He unleashed that potential.
He really did. They and the BBC, of course, were chief in leading the charge against him, with propping up this anti-Semitism smear and portraying it as if he could be, or we might not. You decide. There wasn't that at all. He you know, and they've lied about Julian Assange as well. They've lied constantly. I mean, Emmy Butlin, I think, has had to personally, just herself, get the BBC to retract the lie that there were charges in Sweden about 6 or 7 times. Just, I mean, you know, if they've published that once on the BBC website, how many times have they repeated it around the world with their 35,000 employees that there were charges in Sweden? The lie, you know? And they're obviously.
By the way, just on that, because this is, sorry to interrupt you, the revelation that I don't think got enough of an airing, that the Swedish authorities wanted to drop this case in 2012, and there was a CPS that said, no, keep it going, the emails. That tells you everything you want to know about the Assange case. This was a persecution. This was about getting him extradited to the United States because he embarrassed the empire. He exposed the war crimes and high crimes that have been carried out in our name, and he became a threat, a huge threat to their ability to function as normal as a consequence. And the sex charges were appended to the case in order to try and dismantle his support and demobilize his support amongst the general public. And it worked. It certainly worked where The Guardian was concerned, because that's when they turned on him.
Yeah. Keir Starmer was the head of the CPS at the time, as you said. I think there's emails from his office to Sweden when they were talking about, you know, closing that investigation, to say, don't you dare get cold feet, I think was the quote.
Yeah, that's right.
But the point I was going to make about the BBC, they're doing all this lying. You've got a situation on Twitter at the moment where the Great Reset is trending. Literally an hour ago, I saw it earlier, yeah. And Twitter are pointing you towards a BBC and Reuters fact check to get your... Well, everybody knows that they've been lying about so many other things. Why should they believe them now? If the BBC and these organisations are not going to go, okay, we've messed up here. We've given you some false information. We're sorry. These are the reasons we do it. It was either accidental or we did it on purpose, and these were the extenuations. Until there's going to be some sort of moment where it's like, okay, let's just talk about what's going on and what's happened here, because unless there's some honesty and some truth, we're not going to get out of this, and we're going to be in this constantly forever. We're going to be in a post-COVID nightmare. Nobody's going to want to make any decisions. They're paralyzed down there to do anything. They won't make any decision whatsoever because I don't know. I don't know.
By the way, Gordon, this is not a conspiracy. Look at some of the most egregious legislation that's ever been passed through Parliament. That's been passed through in the last few months. The policing bill, the borders bill, the nationality bill. I mean, that's some of the most egregious and sinister legislation. That's almost proto-fascist legislation. And that's passed through under the radar because the media hasn't covered it properly, in my view. It's not covered it properly.
But they're covering the party from a year ago constantly. That's absolutely, you know, that I've been at protests over the last 5 years, John. I am not kidding here, where there are 200,000 people have been at the center of London. They've shut down the entire city almost. That was absolutely ignored by the media. In fact, the only time they talked about it in the media was when they took a fringe incident from people elsewhere in the city and promoted that and said, look how racist these people are. Didn't quote the 200,000 people, but insulate Britain turn up with 5 people and they're all over the media. Something's up here, isn't it?
Yeah. No, there's definitely an agenda. There's an editorial policy. As I said earlier, these people exist to serve power. I mean, there's a famous exchange between Noam Chomsky and Andrew Marr from many, many years ago, where he said, you think I don't believe what I'm saying? He says, no, what I'm saying is if you didn't believe those things, you wouldn't be in that position. Because these people are products of a certain ideological background, and they believe that this is the best of all possible worlds. And so when they get into these nice cushy numbers as columnists, as broadcasters, their primary function, unconsciously held, is to protect the establishment. It's not to see it damaged to the extent that it's discredited, because they socialize with these people, Gordon.
Of course.
Some of these Downing Street parties, some main political journalists were there. That's why this is not being made a bigger story than it was. You know, they're compromised by the way that they come from the same schools, they're part of the same networks. Laura Kuenssberg, who thankfully is retiring, I think, in Easter, she's very close to Boris Johnson. She's very close to some Tory party ministers, cabinet ministers. You know, it runs right across the board. What was the name of the red-haired woman who was the head of News of the World, the editor? She was very friendly with David Cameron. Maybe she caught the phone hacking.
The one with the red hair.
Yeah, I've even forgotten her name. So that just shows you where she's going to, her legacy is. But they're going to the same dinner parties. You know, that's a real impediment to our democracy.
And of course,
that's why there's been this vacuum that's been left of information, of challenging, of questioning authority, and it's been filled by conspiracy theory. And it does, and I can understand why, because there's no one holding these people to account. They've lied about Iraq. We've had cash for peerages. We've had cash for questions. We've had corruption at the top. Nobody's held to account. There's no, as I said, during this Julian Assange installment, the latest installment when the US authorities' appeal against his extradition was upheld, Julian Assange in steel handcuffs, Tony Blair in golden cufflinks. That tells you that the rot that's at the heart of our establishment,
And of course, if anybody does stand up, John, if ever there is a politician stand up, they get destroyed, as we've talked about with Chris Williamson and Jeremy Corbyn, and then with journalists as well. If ever you get a journalist who is anti-establishment and who is asking questions of authority, they're cast to the side. They're extradited almost from society, aren't they?
Well, look what happened to Craig Murray. The man was put in prison for 4 months.
Put in prison
because he covered the Alex Salmond trial, and he was putting the defence case across in his blog because the reporting was always about the prosecution. And he sees this as being a setup. And a lot of people, intelligent people, agree with him regarding Alex Salmond from within the upper echelons of the SNP and a cabal surrounding Nicola Sturgeon. And so he was caught in that. And that was a chilling judgment by Lady Dorian, saying that new media doesn't have the same rights as legacy media. So somebody from a legacy media was doing the same kind of reporting in the court, but they're protected by what? Because they're seen as part of the establishment. Yeah,
Craig didn't publish anything that wasn't published elsewhere. He didn't do any of that, and obviously he felt the whole way. I feel the need to push the other side of things as well more, because of the way the media, look at the news in a skew-effed way and shine a light on it in a certain way for whatever their narrative is. And they're definitely there's definitely a drive at the moment from the powerful and the elite in the Western world to be able to, you know, have global jurisdiction over what the truth is and who is and isn't a journalist. And that is, you say proto-fascist, then we're leading straight into really dangerous water now, aren't we, John?
Yeah, we are. There's a slide into authoritarianism. Obviously, people are lumping in the vaccine into that. I don't put myself do that. I don't trust the government on vaccine or COVID, but I do trust the NHS. I do trust other governments more than our government. So, you know, and the WHO, I don't think they're part of any lurid conspiracy. But that's a subject that, you know, we've already touched on it, but the Great Reset, etc. That's a subject. But, you know, but just to say this, the traction of conspiracy theory is now such, it's time to debate these people. Yeah. You can't just try and marginalize them, say, oh, they're crackpots or they're cranks. I've done it myself. It's wrong. You have to debate them. Unless you debate them, then they're always going to think, what have you got to hide? What have you got to fear?
We do need that. And I got upset with somebody just a few weeks ago because they accused me of calling them COVID-idiots and at the beginning of the pandemic. But I really tried not to do that because I was well aware that these are people that have been lied to about stories that I've been telling them about for years. So, you know, your jumping off point should be the media and the government are lying to me until you prove otherwise. It really is, you know, that's the situation.
They've created this information ghetto, this black hole of media and proper media investigation and proper media reporting, holding the powerful to account as a media is meant to do in a functioning, healthy democracy. They've created that because there's been such a concentration of wealth and power in this period of late capitalism, because the pie is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because this model of capitalism, this economic system is now unsustainable on any level, on its own terms, in terms of reproducing capital and in profit, also in terms of dangers to the environment and the ecological system. And COVID, in many respects, is a warning from Mother Nature about how this is a runaway train now. Somebody needs to put a brake on.
In our last conversation, we talked about the climate threat, and we talked about how many, you know, of these diseases are we going to come across, you know, that's buried in the ice as it's melting.
Because we're encroaching more and more on the animal kingdom, and so there's now an intersection between interpenetration between the animal kingdom and ours and human habitation, and that's going to create new viruses all the time. And so unless there's a real, you know, I mean, we talk about the word reset, and when it's used it falls from the lips of the powerful, as it was by Justin Trudeau and so on, and that's been held up at the UN, then obviously people are going to be suspicious. But we do need some kind of reset, but from below, in the interest of the masses, not the elites.
Yeah, everybody needs to be involved in it. There's Julian Assange, I think, mentioned it years and years ago. He was talking about how, you know, for civilization to progress, you need to include all of civilization, not just the eaten toffs at the top, because we've been doing it that way. Look where it's got us, you know. And
also as well, I mean, look at the way that we've mishandled the vaccine rollout. This new mutations comes from Africa, because this has been a global crisis, a pandemic, but there's not been a global response. There's been greed, there's been hoarding of vaccines in the West. Obviously, the role of big pharma needs to be looked at in terms of what they charge the developing countries for their medicines, etc. Until everybody's safe, nobody's safe in the midst of a pandemic. And so new mutations are getting the space to develop and to incubate. And so unless we start thinking about sending vaccinations and appropriate response to other countries, then we'll never get out of this. We'll never get out of this.
No, it's going to be a breeding ground for new variants. I find Pfizer are doing brilliant out of this. Yeah, I saw, I think it was in the Mirror a few months ago. They'd made something like £4 billion just from the NHS from the vaccines, and it was that. I mean, and I found out today that the CEO of Pfizer is on the board at Reuters or something like that.
These networks are insidious. I go back to Corbyn's idea of a state-run pharmaceutical company for the benefit of society, as a service, as part of the NHS, an NHS controlled. I mean, that sounds. I mean, that's a no-brainer.
It's really simple, isn't it? It's like,
Unless you
of
have a
course,
vested interest in the status quo and extracting, as you say, profits and share dividends, etc. That's the problem. Corporations have got far too much sway in every aspect of our lives, and there's no control. They have too much influence. Wealth is power, and so there's massive and increasing chasm between people who ordinary working people and those who are on the boards of these global corporations. No country can control them. They can change their tax affairs. They trigger a race to the bottom between countries competing for jobs. Well, will you tax us less? Will you tax us less? I mean, Amazon, Apple, all these companies, they are part of a problem, and something has to be done because they are in inverse proportion to it. They're able to run rampant around the world. Our democracy is corroded. Our democracy is corroded. It's democracy in name only now.
Yeah, it's not. I find it hilarious that we had a situation a few weeks ago where the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the American State Department were saying that Nicaragua's elections were, quote, a pantomime. I'm old enough to remember the last two American elections, John. Yeah. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the last two here as well. And you couldn't call anything that happened in those four elections, or you know what? And you could go Brexit as well and look at how that was boiled down to a series of sound bites and slogans rather than actual, debate about it. We're not in a democracy. It's a mockracy, is what it is. It's a mockracy.
It's organized democracy. And looking at the geopolitical picture, because you touched on American elections, the Capitol riots of January the 6th, that's a country that's at war with itself. America is collapsing from within. And I think the real role, and we're seeing this real prospect of military conflict in Ukraine. Russia's got hundreds of thousands of troops massed on its border. Putin has been very bullish now. He's now come out today, says, unless this is resolved, there will be military action. He's had enough. Whatever you think of Putin, this is symptomatic of the catastrophic mishandling of the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s in the West. They saw it as a triumphalist moment. They didn't see it as an opportunity to install peace and stability where all there'd been discord and friction and crisis and the threat of nuclear war and nuclear destruction and Armageddon. They saw it as validation of their system of neoliberalism, neoliberal capital. And Putin came to power in 2000, Gordon. He went to Washington offering partnership with a vision for a greater Europe in which Russia can be, and he was completely rebuffed.
Yeah.
Russia was to be seen as a vanquished foe and treated accordingly. Look at us now. The America's hegemonic moment has passed in all but name. China's a force, Russia's a force, and I think America is a fading empire. I think we're living through the dying days of Rome, and I think a lot of the chaos that we're experiencing is a consequence of the friction caused by that. No empire leaves the stage of history voluntarily. There's always a fierce struggle. And the real challenge for countries like China and Russia and others is managing US hegemonic decline.
Yeah, they're getting, it's like, I remember it was a while ago, I pictured, if you imagine, at the end of Terminator 2, where the T-1000 falls into the vat of molten metal, and you see the ugly sides coming up, and you see it's like, oh, you see the ugliness and this ugliness. That's what we're seeing now as the sort of like
future. Yeah, dystopian future.
And I mean, look at who.
Yeah, go ahead.
So all I was going to point out was look at who we're hitching our wagon to. We're hitching our wagon to this as well. We're tying ourselves in even tighter with America and Israel and Australia with the AUKUS deal. And also the Ukraine thing. We keep propping up Ukraine as if they're this.
By the way, that's a very interesting connection you've established between those countries. What connects all those countries you just mentioned? America, Australia, Israel. Settler colonialism on the basis of white supremacy.
And
Zionism is a species of white supremacy. And these are colonial states, imperialist states, and they're underpinned by the ethos of might is right. For all they're trying to make themselves to be pillars of civilization and upholders of international law and human rights, they're not. They're the very antithesis of those things. It's almost Orwellian that those countries are responsible for more death and destruction than any other. And yet countries like Iran and China and Cuba and Venezuela, they're held up to be the bogeymen of the world, the uncivilized, people of a lesser culture, they need to be destroyed. You know, Russia de lenda est, Iran de lenda est, China de lenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. We always need a Carthage. We need an external enemy in order to try and achieve some kind of internal and domestic consensus to cohere around. Keep the children scared, and they're more likely to behave.
Well, we're certainly scared at the moment with this with this new variant, this Omicron. I've been reading and listening to some doctors on it, and there's a I think it's Hong Kong University. I've got a paper that's in peer review at the moment, and they've done something called Exvivo. I've got to try and get this right. Exvivo experiments, and that's they've taken lung tissue from people and done experiments of it outside the body. There's like ex vitro or in vitro or anyway. It's pioneering, this stuff is, and what they've found is it's 70. This variant is something like 70 times more transmissible in the bronchial tubes, and that's why they're kind of like, they suspect that could be why it's more transmissible, because it's more in the tubes rather than the tissue of the lungs that the Delta and the other when it first came out was making people feel like they were drowning. So there may be some positive coming out of this, that it may be more viral but less impactful, and that could very well be the case. I'm certainly hoping on that, but the problem we've got is that if people were told that, and they had some trust in their media, and it was like, right, okay, well, this is the situation, what can be done? Well, we need to protect the vulnerable. So if you are vulnerable, when you need to stay at home, you need to get your groceries delivered, etc., etc. You need to obviously meet outside if you can with people. You could do all of these measures, but they don't do any of that, do they? And there's no focus on health either, John, and that's really worrying to me. At the beginning of this, we had old Joe Wicks doing his thing on the BBC, but other than that, there's certainly nobody now going eat healthy. You look at me, John, I've changed radically from when we first met, and that's because at the beginning I started exercising and I changed my meals and I started taking vitamin D and whatever, and really looking after my health. There's no drive for that. It's just, we might have to lock down, but get your vaccination and your booster.
It's all reactive. It's all reactive. There's no sense of, there's no movement for wellness. And obviously a lot of people are drinking more than they used to, or, they're relying on substances to get themselves through self-medication, because they feel that they're on their own. I mean, it's hard to get a GP appointment now. I mean, I got one a couple of weeks ago, but before that, I'd never seen a GP in 2 years. I'd one phone consultation, and there's been a controversy over that. The GPs have kind of lapsed into this, not all, but this mindset of they're getting very good money and they just do these phone consultations, and it's much easier for them. They get an easier ride. It's an easier workload because they can, because of the nature of phone consultations. It's an entirely different configuration of how GP surgeries are operating. There's been controversy over that, and a lot of people who can get GP appointments are going to A&E departments, and so that's putting extra pressure on the A&E. They're already dealing with the usual workload, especially in winter time. So there has to be a reimagining of how we operate. I think we've reached an idea of the NHS becoming unfit for purpose. It's been purposely underinvested in. It's been purposely degraded so that the Tories and those who are lusting after America and the profits from American, healthcare companies to come in and start cherry picking different aspects of it in order to try and generate capital and make it a profit-making business along the same lines as the American healthcare system. There is a real trend towards that happening, and that's a worrying thing. And the problem is, because of all the bandwidth in the media, going back to media, it's been expended on, things that celebrity, things like such as stories surrounding Prince Andrew, which is really a non-story because they don't cover it properly. Yeah. It's all the trivial stuff that they focus on. So much on COVID. There's nothing on this slide into American corporate kind of culture as we follow America on this rocket ship to hell in the terms on the aspect of late capitalism I mentioned, because unsustainability is key to how we get out of this. And we're going back into the arms of that unsustainable model. They just want to go back to normal. No lessons have been learned. They've forgotten everything and learned nothing from the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's incredible. And now they're talking about, they're talking about more restrictions, and which means all of these issues are going to be exacerbated again if that happens.
Well, what they've done there, Gordon, that's the point as well. They're heaping responsibility over Christmas regarding Omicron onto the shoulders of the public.
Yeah.
Be cautious. Have Christmas, but be cautious. What does that mean? So now so what will happen if there is a spike in hospitalizations, which a lot of people are predicting in January? We'll get the blame. Oh, you were partying. You should have been cautious. You should have been cautious. The hospitality sector has been decimated.
Yeah.
No support. Cancel your Christmas. But the government's not taking responsibility, because if they do take that decision, they have to back it up with an economic package.
They would have to sort them out and start paying furlough again, and they don't want to do that.
They don't want to go back there. And so Sunak is keen to get back to traditional Tory policies of low tax, and low cuts to public spending. And there's going to be new austerity coming down the track after this. New austerity.
This is. I was saying this to somebody the other day, and it was like, I was trying to explain, how we got out of the financial crisis was for 10 years. We paid for it. The people who didn't cause it paid for. The people with the least amount of money, the poor and the working class, paid for it in the series of cuts and austerity measures. I mean, I think it was only in the last 5 years we'd finished paying for, was it World War I or World War II? And we get all of this all the money printing that's gone on. This is going to be their solution. That was the Anglo-American.
That was the Anglo-American loan we paid back from the end of World War II. Yeah, but even in that climate, we still developed a National Health Service. We still rolled out a mass program of public house construction, etc. We still enlarged. We brought into being national insurance. We enlarged public pensions. That was from a Labour government, a transforming radical Labour government. That, if it come to pass today, would be, compared to Corbyn, that government was Stalinist. It really brought into control the main levers of the economy into under public control. Now where we are, it's a travesty. We have a government of chaos that's managing chaos, and it's not doing it very well. And increasingly, we're left to our own devices. Remember at the start of this, we were talking about celebrities were doing these events to raise money for the NHS. Well, I'm sorry, the NHS is not a charity.
Yeah.
And when we start imagining it as a charity, then, the rot is again setting in. Nick Ferrari this morning on his radio show talked about the burden on the NHS and A&E departments, and what his solution was. Everybody gets 12 free appointments, and then you have to start paying for it. There was a time when Nick Ferrari wouldn't even be a Nick Ferrari on mainstream radio. That's how far we've degenerated.
So what he suggests doing is taxing the ill.
Yeah, that's it.
We're going to tax the sickest people in the country. That's his solution.
It's almost a form of eugenics, So we've long been in the midst of a class struggle, but the only problem, there's only one class that knows it's fighting. The other class is being left dormant. Again, we go back to Corbyn. That's why he was seen as such a danger, because he was raising class consciousness amongst the working class that was managing to supersede false divisions based on race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and the rest of it. He was bringing us all together under a list of economic demands and social policy that made sense on every level and in every particular.
2017, John, I was so excited to vote for Corbyn. Yeah. I couldn't put my X in that box quick enough. I mean, 2,500 votes or whatever it was, his own party cost him, that. And then 2 years later, just 2 years later, I voted for him again. Yeah. But I felt like I needed to take a shower afterwards. It was like, what had happened in those 2 years, they had managed to destroy anything that was good about that movement or about him with the Brexit issue. And I felt
he was under siege. He was under siege. All he could do was fight fires every day. He was responding to misleading headlines in the press. He was being shared. He was being doorstepped. They did a real number on the guy. They did a massive number on the guy. Even then, he's still got they've come out with all these stats, you know, because of the first past the post system, the electoral stats are always skewed. There's never a fair representation of popularity. The Brexit policy was a disaster. That was the author. That was authored by Keir Starmer. You know, it was the most indecent time in politics in my lifetime. That run up to the 2019 election, the demonisation of Corbyn. Yes, there's things that could have been criticised about Corbyn, but essentially, he did his best. He did his best. He was all served by, I think he was all served by a few people close to him. I'm not going to name names on various issues. Margaret Hodge should have been expelled from the party. She was brought back in, and the role of Alistair Campbell and all these sort of figures from the New Labour era. And now they've got their man. They've got Keir Starmer, and you know, Starmer's ahead in the polls. That's only that's not anything he's done. That's because things have been so bad with the corruption.
Are we going to get any sort of real? I mean, I'm hoping we are reform, like electoral reform, to this system, because I can't see the point in voting anymore, John. I've got to be honest. I do, because it doesn't matter. I mean, if you get there's an old thing from years ago. I think it was a Dudley Moore sketch, and it's an American talking to Dudley Moore, and they're talking about politics. And Dudley Moore asks him, I think it's Dudley Moore anyway, it goes back to the 60s, this does. And he says to this American guy, so what's the main differences between American politics and UK politics? And he says, well, so in the United States, we have the Republican Party, which is the same as your Conservative Party back home. And then we have the Democratic Party, which is the same as your Conservative Party back home. Now, the only difference, the only thing that's changed since then is now we have the Labour Party, which is the same as the Conservative Party back home. There's no difference to them. He's a Tory, Keir Starmer is. He's just wearing a red tie. He's Tory light. So if you look at the two people who could be Prime Minister, there's no difference really between them. They serve corporate interests, they serve power, they serve the state. And it doesn't matter who you vote for in the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, even if they are good people, they get up there, they've got no power. If they actually fight for you, they'll get smeared in the media and slandered, etc. Whatever you vote for now, you're going to get neoliberalism and maybe even neo-fascism if we're going to go that way. Our foreign policy is not going to change. We're still going to be stealing Venezuela's gold. We're still going to be hanging on to America's coattails, no matter who's in. What do we actually vote for? We're in a situation now, John, where we can calculate 20 million votes on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here in a commercial break. But we're still doing a voting system the same way we did hundreds of years ago. Times have moved on. We don't plough fields anymore by hand with a tool. We have machines that go out and do it much more efficiently and, you know, much cheaper and much less time. Why aren't we doing that same thing with our democracy? Why don't we have some sort? Are we going to get any of that out of this?
Because we're underpinned by semi-feudal institutions, the monarchy, House of Lords, an unelected, unaccountable judiciary, this network of private schools, military leadership. There's a 19th century class system that's been superimposed on a late, you know, capitalist economy, and the contradictions are clear. And the system is being kept deliberately opaque. I mean, if you look at, I don't know, the last time you were in a courtroom, the first thing that strikes you is you feel like you've walked into the 19th century. You've got these strange men sitting at the top with wigs on and these gowns on. You've got the crest on. You've got other arcane rituals. I've been on a visit to the House of Commons once, and I was struck by how it's meant to bombard you with hundreds and hundreds of years of tradition. And part of the message is, this is how it is, and this is how it must always be.
Yeah.
There can be no change. You're right, Keir Starmer, you know, Gore Vidal famously coined the catchphrase that America is a one-party state with two right wings. And so is the UK. He also said, he was talking about Tony Blair, this is one of his greatest quotes. and he was talking about the difference between Blair and Major, because he was covering Tony Blair. He was doing an article on the phenomenon of New Labour and coming to power in the 90s. And a journalist asked him, what do you think the difference is between John Major and Tony Blair? And Gore Vidal's response was, one does not bring a measuring rod to Lilliput. And so we're that's the truth. These are political midgets. Yeah. They're all political midgets because they offer nothing transformative. They offer nothing transformative or a radical reconfiguration, the kind that's needed to meet the challenges of the time in which we live. They always go back into the mists of times. So always get rolled out at various points. Winston Churchill, the Second World War, and that's been a monkey on our back. Every war's a rerun of the Second World War. Every enemy that's shaped by the establishment is a new Hitler. Hugo Chavez, Muammar Gaddafi, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping. It's always a new Hitler, and that's part of this trying to forge an internal cohesion on a false basis. Because the main enemy is at home, Gordon.
Yeah.
I'm amazed every time I watch the remembrance ceremony at the front of the cenotaph. The enemy is it's the enemy is the people who are standing at the front who are sending you to get killed. Catch-22. That the enemy is anyone who's going to get you killed, but yet we buy into it like sheep. We still think we're part of something called a national interest. There is no national interest. There is only the interest of the dominant class that's presented to us as the national interest. It's astounding to me that we normalize homelessness, we normalize being cruel to migrants, being cruel to refugees. That's normalized. Some of the stuff that Priti Patel's done has been utterly horrific, And so it's made us ever more cruel. It's made us ever more hard. It's made us more ever less compelled to get together and forge alliances and take to the streets. I think there's a sense of exhaustion. The way the Iraq war was pushed on us, I was part of that movement. It was one of the best movements I've ever been a part of. I was in the States. There was an international mass movement, February 15, 2003, 15 million people marched around the world as one. That was an image of another world, the other world that is possible. Mm-hmm. And again, the establishment came in, the machine did its work. As soon as the troops were going in America, it was like, don't forget what happened to the troops come back from Vietnam and so on. The worshiping the soldiers, worshiping military, and it's really, it's a sad indictment of us, and I use us in inverted commas, in a society in which there is so many different avenues of information, social media, Facebook, etc. But a lot of it's giving us lots of information, but it's not forging into the kind of homogenous ideology that we need to tackle this monster that we're dealing with. Corbyn, again, he came close to doing that. That's why they had to destroy him. But there's too much information, and a lot of it's sown confusion, and confusion makes us paralyzed. We don't know where to move or what direction to move in.
A lot of people,
and that was reflected in that demo against vaccines. There was such a spectrum of messages on that demo.
I've been at protests like that, John, and I'm glad you stopped and you thought about that, because wherever I've been at protests, and I've took a general feeling from all of that, and there were people at these protests from all walks of life, but and they'll be there for all different reasons. Not all of them will be anti-vax. I can guarantee you a good portion of those people where they're down there would have been vaccinated, but they're against this authoritarianism that's coming in. And the media always will portray it to be something that it's not. I've been at so many protests where, like I say, they'll ignore one for 200,000 and then pick on a protest with a few dozen people because it serves their own interests. And I think there's also a lot of people out there as well who are scared to actually voice an opinion, because you see what gets happened to people if they say something that's outside of the narrative. Now they get absolutely pilloried, don't they?
Let me touch on something I found sad, and I probably the treatment of Piers Morgan has been lamentable. This is an old man. I think he needs help. He doesn't need handcuffs. What he said was unacceptable about burning down MPs' offices, but he was reflecting a rising tide of anger that exists, whether they like to deal with it or not. There's a rising tide of become a very angry society. That was reflected in the ugliness of the Brexit debate and that campaigns on either side. we live in a time of either or. That's what maybe one of Corbyn's weaknesses in my mind, both with the vaccine thing and with Brexit, was he's always tried to steer a middle course. But there are certain issues that are so divisive that the middle ground, you end up pleasing nobody and alienating everybody. But he was trying to do something no leader or political has ever done, because he was trying to focus on the things that unite us, not divide us, because that's in the interest of power to keep us divided. But these are very divisive issues by their definition. But the way that Piers Corman was so, demonized, and then obviously he was associated with Corbyn, and there was a false association. Why are you not coming out and speaking out against your brother, etc. But it was what he said was wrong on any level, advocating violence and so on. But he's an old man. I think he's slightly disturbed, and I don't say that to be derogative. I think there may be mental health issues there, but the mental health crisis is a product of the system we live under.
Exactly. I've had mental health problems through this, mate. I think if you haven't had some sort of mental health problems through this, you are very strong and very lucky, as far as I'm concerned. I was talking to a member of my family who was openly saying they've thought about suicide.
The ideation of suicide.
And it's absolutely, it's devastating to think that. I mean, and then you start thinking, well, that's somebody who has got the support of a family.
Well, I'll make a confession right now. I started drinking heavily, and
me too, mate. I've been drinking a lot more.
I'm a guy that's in the gym, but I've been drinking to the point where I've had to do something about it. It was causing me all sorts of problems, and I didn't realize it, and I normalized it. Sitting at night, every day's the same, every night's the same, especially for people who are on their own, but even people who have people. You're trying to navigate this crisis, and you're looking for hope. And a lot of people have turned to drink. I was one of them, and I had to get a grip of myself. Never before had that issue in my life, but I did in the last couple of years. I don't think I'm alone in that.
I don't think you are either, mate.
It's affected people in all sorts of different ways, and it's made us all angrier, as I said. It's made people turn to the alternative forms of information, sources of information, to try and understand what seems like a crisis. When, also in the West, we've been used to relative prosperity. We cannot conceive of a virus that could knock everything into touch, that could have wreak so much damage and despair and carnage. It must be part of an agenda, because we've had it relatively easy compared to other parts of the world. Africa and Asia, etc. They've been dealing with these viruses much more than we have.
Yeah.
So maybe they trust their systems more than we do. So there's a lot to unpack. I think we've unpacked a lot, but there's a lot to unpack with regards to COVID. What COVID is, what it's revealed about us, what it says about us, both as individuals and as a society. I do think we suffer from a propensity to selfishness. Not all of us. I mean, in general, because of 40 years of Thatcherite values. It's a value system. It's not just an economic system. When the Assange trial was going on down at the Royal Courts, I met somebody, and I found out that their daughter had killed themselves in the last few years, and she couldn't understand why. And one of the reasons why they've become quite, going to the Assange protests and what have you, is because of that tragedy. And they were explaining that the daughter had killed themselves because there's all these avenues of information now, and she became an activist, but it was just she felt so hopeless because of just how awful things are. And I'm trying to figure out ways of fixing this, John, and trying to focus on what unites us rather than what divides us. And I see too many people just bitching and arguing on Twitter, and I just look at these people and I just think, you're not enemies. Why are you arguing with each other? You're not enemies. I've been as guilty as that as anyone. You're sitting there on social media, you say things that you probably wouldn't say if you were in a different
I've done the same.
And you end up dancing on the head of a pin. I think Freud coined the phrase narcissism of the small difference. The small, and that's prevalent on the left. The small differences become so important, on various issues. I mean, obviously Life of Brian, the different parties, the People's Republic, and that's bedeviled the left-wing politics. My worry is that there's nobody to vote for anymore. I mean, I've got hope in Scottish independence. I don't see it as a panacea. I see it as a very important first step. I think we've got to fracture this British state. I think we've got to try and weaken it in terms of how it operates in its global stage. I don't think we'll get a second referendum willingly. I don't think Boris Johnson or any other Tory Prime Minister will not want to go down as the Prime Minister who, quote unquote, lost Scotland. It was too close for the establishment's comfort last time in 2014, and they'll not issue the Section 30 required to get cooperation to sanction one. So my worry is it's Nicola Sturgeon, and she's obviously been so caught up in COVID, but there seems to be no plan B in the event that Section 30 is not granted, that we can hold one with the connivance of Westminster. And so that's causing a factionalism in the Scottish independence movement now. There is a growing movement of people who are anti-Sturgeon within the independence movement.
Yeah, I can imagine why, because I mean, I don't want Scotland to leave. I wouldn't want that, but I'm totally aware that it's not so much that you want to cut off a gangrene leg. It's you're the leg and the rest of the body and neck and everything is gangrene. You want to cut the rest of it off. I get it. I understand it. I think it would be terrible to, but I mean, who am I? I don't know. But with the whole Sturgeon thing, I do get the certain. I get the feeling that she doesn't really want independence.
No,
she's using it to keep in power.
She's not pushing for it. She's very managerial. She's kind of like Tony Blair in a sense. She has a compassionate bent to her, but she's also blind, I think, to the needs of the people in terms of bread and butter issues. Poverty is still endemic in Scotland. We have a health crisis up there. We have a drugs death crisis in Scotland, the highest level of drug deaths per capita in Europe.
In Europe,
yeah. So there are problems here. It's certainly, but she gets away with a lot because she's seen as being, she's seen as being the conduit for independence, the tribune of the Scottish independence, and because she's not a Tory, and the Tories are still loathed up here, and that's another thing we have to look at is the division that's in the working class people along different regions in these islands that was exposed by Brexit. Post-industrial heartlands, Brexit. They felt that their plight was a result of migrants taking their jobs, free movement, Brussels, and all the false prophets like Nigel Farage capitalised on that. Boris Johnson saw that was a potential base to get him into power, and he did it very well. And so all they have to offer the working class is Union Jacks, remembrances of things past like the Second World War, the Spitfire, the Dam Buster song, the sort of British obscurantist myths. And again, that's bedeviled us. That's halted our progress. So it was easy to paint Corbyn as unpatriotic because he didn't sing the national anthem loudly enough at various events. But he's with the people. He understands that patriotism is about looking after people. It's not about exploiting them. It's not about leaving them to fend for themselves. It's not about food banks. We have more food banks, I believe, in the UK now than we have libraries. That's where we are now, Gordon.
What have we got now to be proud of? I mean, we don't have human rights in this country. We have the illusion of them. We don't have a free press. That's journalism's in jail. We have a subservience to Washington. Whatever they want, they get, and we just end up going blindly following. And we just come out of Afghanistan, which was a disastrous 20-year war where we, beat the Taliban and then installed the Taliban with the Taliban. And now we're talking about going and they had to say, no, we're not going to send troops to Ukraine. Ukraine's all the way over there. And I'm not sure whether you know this, but there are elements of neo-fascists in their government. You know what I mean? So it's all Russia's bad. So there's nothing to be proud of. We get, like you say, we've got food banks, poverty, the wealth gap has stretched now to.
Well, what happens is because most of the people who are poor, the poorest, socioeconomically poor, they'll either vote for a politician who really hates them, like Boris Johnson, or they won't vote at all.
Yeah.
And a non-vote is a political statement in itself. We're getting ever lower turnouts at elections. And that apathy plays into the hands of the establishment.
Oh, they just love that.
It sustains the status quo.
Yeah.
It sustains the status quo as it is. And so going back to your question, what can change? For me, Scottish independence, constitutional change is better than no change. But in 2014, I was against it on the basis of class, that, you know, a bus driver in Newcastle has got more in common with a bus driver in Glasgow than he has with so a rich person, you know, that kind of thing. That's true in theory, but that requires a level of class consciousness. And the last chance, in my view, to save this union, which is way beyond its sell-by date, was Corbyn's programme of social and economic justice. Take away man's need for bread, you take away his need for revolution. And it's always been the case. So...
well, they do. So was it Stalin that said that an entire country is only 2 skip meals away from a revolution or something like that? You know, who knows what's going to happen in the future? And, you know, it'll be all right, mate, because Boris Johnson's going to go soon, and then we're going to get Liz Truss or Priti Patel or Rishi Sunak, and that'll change everything, won't it?
Or Keir Starmer, you know.
Keir Starmer.
I mean,
we really are screwed.
Sir Keir Starmer. Yeah, I mean, I said during the Corbyn years, until the class struggle within Labour is fought and won, the class struggle without cannot be fought.
Yeah, your neighbour's not your enemy. It's you know, these anti-vaxxers. If you're all you know, part of the anti-vax, but they're not your enemy. People who are fearful of their government overreaching, authoritarian, and using this pandemic and this disaster and this to extend their authoritarianism. You know, go back, look at the Patriot Act and look at how that came out of 9/11. And the same things are happening now, and we people need to
fear is their aphrodisiac. Fear is their aphrodisiac. Whether it's fear of the enemy within or fear of an enemy without, it's their aphrodisiac, and it's always used as a pretext to tighten the screw. The policing bill, the nationality borders bill, as we've touched on those before, they passed through with a whimper. There was no opposition from the opposition.
None.
Starmer went along with it. There was no real media coverage. There was no furore over it because we're in the midst of a pandemic. People are focused on that because the media is dominated with that every single day.
Yeah, if you promote anything that they seem to be, you know, promote vaccine hesitancy or go against the orthodoxy, then you're immediately demonized. John, thanks very much for talking. I know we've been an hour and 20. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'm minded of the words of Abraham Lincoln when he said that the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. And this is definitely the stormy present. And this is a time when we should be hitting the streets. Obviously, Omicron, we've got to take it carefully, seriously, but there has to be some kind of regrouping, realignment of the left. We've not been able to do it because of COVID and everything's been reduced to Zoom meetings, etc. But there has to be a reconfiguration of the left. I think it's high time. I'm talking here, I might be impertinent because I'm talking here, obviously I'm supporting Scottish independence but the Labour Party is too broad a church now. How can you have a functional political party that presents itself as a potential putative party of government when you've got pro-war MPs sitting alongside anti-war MPs, pro-Palestine, pro-Israel, anti-Zionist, pro-Zionist? It's unfit for purpose. It can't go on that basis. It can't go on that basis. There's always going to be the internal struggle is always going to take precedence over politics as normal, and that's what Keir Starmer's done. He spent more time attacking Corbyn and his enemies Corbyn and his friends than he has attacking the Tories and their friends.
Well, I saw him they expelled an 84-year-old grandmother who's been in the Labour Party since she was 18 or something like that for liking somebody else's Facebook post.
No,
this is like Stasi levels of.
Yeah, they've unleashed a reign of terror. They want to. It's not enough to destroy Corbyn. They've got to destroy the Corbyn project and any single thing that he believes in, and anybody who's close to him. They want to make this is a counter-revolution writ large, Gordon.
Yeah. Anything good is getting opposed. It's the same in America. You've got the Build Back Better bill that, you know, they'll find a reason to block any good piece of legislation or anything good.
By the way, there's a very good chance Trump's going to come back in 2024.
I know. And this is
a very good chance.
I'm glad you brought
Biden
that up.
was the wrong choice. He was a 70-odd-year-old man who's got early stage dementia. It's almost like the dying days of Rome, you know.
I said that the other day to the wife. I said anytime when it was announced that Liz Truss was taking over the Brexit stuff, I said, soon we're going to have a horse in the Houses of Parliament. We're going to have a horse as an MP. I said, it's coming. I know it is. It's getting that ridiculous. John, thanks very much. Where can people find you, mate?
John Wight 1 on Twitter. That's where I am most times. And from there, you can get on my profile. You see books, articles, etc., where you can catch me.
Thanks very much for your time, mate. And
oh God, always a pleasure. Take care.
You, Jen.